There are a lot of different ways to flush trim material. Sometimes you'll use a flush trim saw, sometimes you'll use a flush trim bit in a router. It really depends on the application. In this case, I've got some trim on the side piece of a serving tray I'm working on, and on one side it does overhang. The problem is on this piece, I can't really use a bearing because if I can't really use a router bit with a bearing because if I do, the bearing could fall into the gap where the joinery is and then ruin the piece. So in this episode, we're going to cover how to do that with an auxiliary fence at the router table. Now, calling this an auxiliary fence is perhaps being a little bit kind. It's a piece of plywood I kicked. My particular one has a dovetail slot for the micro jig match fit clamps that I bought. I really like those clamps, but you don't need them. You can certainly use just F clamps to hold it onto your router table fence. You'll notice that there's a bit of a gap here, and that actually corresponds with the material or the banding height that I want to get rid of. I've used these 7mm spacers. My banding's about 5mm, so it gives me a little bit of wriggle room. And that's offset from the router table itself. I can reference the workpiece up against the fence with the overhanging material actually underneath the fence in the space underneath. What I need to do now, well, first is change my bit over to a straight bit of some sort, whether that's a spiral bit or a regular straight bit. Doesn't need to have any bearing whatsoever. I need to get that in my router, then line the fence up with the forwardmost protruding edge of the router bit, so that when I pass this underneath, it'll trim off all that excess material. Because life got in the way, it's been a couple of days since I flush trimmed that. But how did it turn out? Well, first off, I did cheat. I did do 2 passes. This Kari, the dark piece on top, is pretty prone to chip out. I don't know if it's all Kari or this particular piece. So I did it in 2 passes so that there was less load for the router to take off. And basically the results are perfect. I can just feel at one end a little bit grabs my fingernail, but at the other end it's perfect. So that's more likely how much pressure I was applying to the fence, and it might have just drifted off slightly. But this still needs to be sanded, so this will be taken care of in the sanding process with no problem. The same operation could be done at the table saw using the same style fence, and then you wouldn't need to worry about the chip out. However, on a smaller piece like this, I just felt a little bit safer doing it on the router table. I didn't have to lean as far over the saw, so either way the results were still pretty great. Thanks for watching.